And then people were like, well, this doesn't work in Tmux and it doesn't work in WeChat and it doesn't work in Vim. And I'm like, what the hell? And then my next windmill that I'm looking at is variable size text in the terminal. So when I'm getting a markdown file, I want to see the headings big and
like in
whatever.
Emacs, right?
Yes. So why should only Emacs users benefit?
Like Rio, for example, is a new terminal out there. So it can adapt the Kitty graphics protocol and use it, right?
Yes, absolutely. I encourage everyone to adopt it. There's an open spec. It's using Kitty to replace the file open dialogues in Linux. You say file save page as. Here you see there's actually a Kitty instance that's running a file choosing kitten. Because ebook readers are a big boon for elderly people because you can make the font size bigger. In fact, I do that myself. I don't know if you can see
As you
this on the
age.
screen, but yeah, as I
we
age, my eyes have gotten weaker, and so I don't like to wear specs while reading on my Kindle, so I make the font size big.
Do you ever get in trouble with Kitty because of the language that you decided to use Python? Since we hear nowadays everyone is like Rust. You just hear that everywhere, right? I have a tough one for you. I have a good question.
All right,
I want to see.
let me drink some water
grab
first.
your water first. Yep. So you mentioned it. We briefly talked about it. I think you know what I'm gonna ask, probably, right? So, what are your thoughts on Tmux?
Oh,
Do you talk to the Tmux maintainer for compatibility when you try to deploy something new? Do you have communication? What's his name? I don't remember his name, but
I did try, but he wasn't interested, so I don't anymore.
your main IDE, which one is it? Or editor?
It used to be Win, now it's NeoWin. So you can see this is a TD file inside NeoWin.
If you're listening to this as a podcast, remember that it was originally recorded as a video. If you're not following along, you can go to my YouTube channel. My username is Linkarzu. And if you want to support me to keep this podcast going, you can donate in Ko-fi. I'm going to leave a link in the description. All right, so let's get started with this chapter then.
I have a special guest today, COVID, which we all know is the creator of the Kitty terminal. And I didn't know that you're also the creator of another application called Calibre, right?
Yes. In fact, Calibre is my main job. Kitty is my hobby.
Oh, okay. So Calibre is the main one. So really appreciate you being here, COVID. Really, big fan of Kitty. So thank you very much for joining us and talking about your tools today. How's it going, by the way?
It's very good. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to a fun chat. So, what do you want to start with?
How did it all get started? That's the first thing I want to know, because I thought, that Kitty was the main thing. And I was like, okay, Kitty. And I went into your profile, to your website, and then I saw Calibre, and I was like, Calibre, I have seen that somewhere. It's something related to books, right? So
I'll tell you the history. So I'm a big reader of books. So I read like 100 books a year. I've been doing that all my life. So at some point I was a grad student in the US at Caltech. And there in the neighborhood, there were no good libraries with fiction books. And I was too poor to buy like Malum books at the time. But what I did have was a little MyTac Neo GPS navigation device. And so I used to get books from the internet, various places, convert them to text files and read them on that device. So that was my first experience with ebooks. So then around 2006, I was still at Caltech, still a grad student, still a lot of time on my hands. And Sony released the first e-ink based reader in the US. It was a PRS 500. So immediately, the day after it was released, I went and bought it and I got it home with me and started trying to use it. Unfortunately, Sony had a proprietary USB protocol. It did, but nowadays all readers connect either using the NTP protocol or the USB master device protocol. Just standardized, and there were tools to interact, libraries to interact with, and so on. But at that time, Sony had its own proprietary USB protocol, and so I couldn't get the device to connect to my Linux computer. I had to use Sony's proprietary software. I mean, I don't remember now, but I think I got it either on the VM or on a Windows computer or something. But anyway, so I decided that let me, since I know how to program and I have some spare time, let me try to reverse engineer it and get something working. So I found this website called mobileread.com, of which I'm still a member, and there were a lot of people there hanging out who were interested in ebooks and e-reading. And so with the help of some people there, I remember in particular one guy from Russia named Igor, um, I ended up sort of reverse engineering the USB protocol. So I used a tool to dump the actual packets that the device would send in response to commands, when using the Sony software. And then I print these out on A4, on US letter sheets of paper since I was in the US. And I would take them with me to lunch. And then, lunch was kind of a complete time for me. So I would just sit and eat my lunch and pour over those traces of USB packets and try to reverse engineer things. So anyway, I managed to reverse engineer things with a lot of help, and I released the software, something called libprs7, classic open source thing. So anyway, a lot of people were very happy to have that thing and it got a bit of popularity. So I decided to write a GUI for it, just as a front end. And add the ability. So Sony also, apart from the proprietary USB protocol, they also had their own ebook format called LRF, which was again proprietary and not documented and blah, blah, blah. So again, with the help of some people who had written some Python code to convert to to parse the LRF format and convert to it and so on, I adapted that code and improved it and integrated it into libprs500 and added a basic GUI just so you connect your device and click on buttons to send books to this kind of thing. So that was the start of what eventually became Calibre. So for a couple of years, I just kept doing that. I would release things every few days. I'd fix new things, find new bugs, whatever. Get a lot of enthusiastic users. So at some point, I decided, okay, let me put out a donate button for this thing, and maybe I'll get a pizza a week or something. So I put out a donate button on the download page for libprs5. I think it used to run on something called Track at the time, which was a ticketing system. So on the front page of that end. So then I started getting a lot more money than I expected. People were supporting me. I was sort of surprised. And so then around 2008, which is when I got married, I also decided to change the name of libprs500 to Calibre and spruce it up a bit and release it, make it available for Windows and Mac OS as well. And sort of, spend a little more time and effort. And so I did that. And then I graduated a couple of years after that, I think, or maybe a year after that. I don't remember exactly now. And so after graduating, I was supposed to go for a postdoc, but then my wife and I were both theoretical physics PhDs. And so one of the problems with that is that it's very difficult to get a job at the same place as a postdoc. Very, very rarely opportunities open up in the same place at the same time. So, we wanted to stay together, obviously. We'd already been apart for several years as grad students. And so we wanted to stay together. So I said, let me take a sabbatical from physics after graduating from Caltech and spend a year or two working on Calibre full time and see how it goes. And, I'll move to wherever it is she's going. Just stay with her and work on Calibre from home. So that's what I did. It was actually quite a involved process. Was I had to apply for a visa that allowed me to do work while being a dependent. Those were the just nonsense there. But anyway, so it all worked out, and I got my visa, and I spent a year or two working on Calibre full time. And that was around the time Amazon came out with this Kindle and the ebook market really took off. So if you look at a history of activity in Calibre, you see around 2010, 2011 is kind of the peak amount of activity. And so those were the years when Calibre was really growing. And now it's grown to, has about 3 million users and it's using over 200 plus templates. It does everything you would ever want to do with an ebook. You can read it, you can convert it, you can edit it, you can basically do whatever you want with it. In fact, you send it to 50 different devices. There's a content server that allows you to browse your ebook collection over the net and so on. It's got insane number of features. So anyway, so that was how Calibre started. And then coming to Kitty about 9 or 10 years ago, I think, I I was dissatisfied with the speed of GVim. So I was using GVim as my editor at the time, and I was dissatisfied with its speed. I don't remember exactly what the issue was, uh, but I was dissatisfied with the speed. I wanted to be able to, wanted to make it faster. And so then I tried. I thought, let me try Terminal. And the Terminal is supposed to be, low overhead, not bloated, blah blah blah. At the time, I didn't know much about terminals. So when I tried that, I found that it didn't make much of a difference in the speed. And so then I started benchmarking terminals, and I found that they were, at the time, at least the leading terminals were all pretty slow. So I said, I can possibly do better, and it'll be a fun side project. So that's how I started Kitty. So, Calibre was mostly written in Python. It's actually got 3 or 4 different languages, but mostly in Python. So I started Kitty in Python with the idea that I will make the front end and, the user scriptable part in Python, and back end would be in C and OpenGL. And so that's what I did. I made it GPU accelerated. Actually, to start with, my first attempt was using Qt, which is the toolkit that I was familiar with from Calibre, to do the actual rendering of the text on the screen. But that was this performance I could not get to a satisfactory level. So I decided to learn OpenGL. And at the time, I knew nothing about GPU programming at all. So I taught myself OpenGL and a little bit enough to not just put characters on the screen. And then that's how Kitty was born. And I released it, and it became popular. Then I made the switch to Terminal Terminal Vim. Sorry, that time it was Vim, not Vim. I don't know if I said new Vim, but at the time I was using Vim. So I made the switch to Terminal Vim, and there was one big problem: there were no colored underlines.
Yeah.
At the time, there were no colored underlines. There were no undercurls, nothing, and I'd gotten used to that in GVim or whatever, and so I said, okay, let me come up with a protocol for this, and make it happen in Kitty, and hopefully we will update and it'll become so maybe then someday implemented, and I'll have color underlines in my editor. So that's what I did. I made a protocol for colored and styled underlines in Kitty, and I released it. And eventually it became popular, and today you have colored underline in your terminal, all thanks to me. This is the one thing I take credit for. So that was my start at sort of trying to extend the terminal capabilities, because as I use the terminal more and more, I sort of found all limitations. So one of the things that I used to do was run some numerics, and I'd like to visualize the results, and I should SSH into a server and run them, and it was painful to visualize the results. You had to copy the file, SCP the file to your local computer, and open it with a thing, or use SSHFS, or whatever, some sort of hacky way. So I said, okay, let me make a graphics protocol for the terminal, so I can just cat a simple PNG image and just view it conveniently. So that was the start. But then once I started investigating the existing landscape, what's around, and I found something called Sigils, which is an ancient protocol for images. That's existed from the 70s or 80s or whatever. So, but then I had various limitations. It didn't support 24-bit color. It's the pictures were really fuzzy, and the library that existed for working with Sigils was not in good shape. So I said, okay, let me come up with my own protocol that works around that gets past these limitations. And that's how the Kitty graphics protocol was born. And and then in designing that, I got a lot of feedback from people, and more discussions and stuff. And so some certain goals came out of that. So one of them was that in the local case, when you are not SSH'd into a different computer and you're viewing an image, you don't want to send it over the terminal because you have to import it as text, base64 encode it or whatever, and that kills performance. So I added the ability to view local files and even shared memory. And then later on, people asked for the ability to have animated images. It's like, fine, what the hell? I've done all this, I can add animated images. And then people were like, well, this doesn't work in Tmux, and it doesn't work in WeChat, and it doesn't work in Vim. And I'm like, what the hell? So then somebody came up with the idea of using a so-called Unicode placeholder. So which is basically when you want to display an image in the terminal, you send a special Unicode character. So it's like hex code 0. Actually, I don't know this. but we're not doing that. But it is one special Unicode character in private use area, which is not assigned for any other purpose. And so that acts as a placeholder. So an application that's not aware of the graphics protocol just treats that placeholder as normal text. And then you use combining marks, the diacritics and so on, to add things like the image ID and the size and the placement and so on. That kind of information is encoded into the text. But because it looks like just plain normal text to the application, like Vim or Tmux or whatever, the application just keeps it together and moves it around itself. And even though it doesn't know that it's actually working with an image. So with this kind of hack, you could get the graphics protocol to work with things like Tmux or Vim or whatever that didn't support the actual protocol. So that was the next big thing I did in Kitty. And then after that, I used to get a lot of bug reports about this key combination is not working and that key combination is not working, and why can't I use Control Shift D in my application to whatever. So then I started looking into the state of keyboard handling in terminal, and it was an absolute disaster. Words fail me. Like pressing alphabetic keys would just send the keys as those characters. You press A, transmits the character A. So there's no way to tell, for example, if it's a key down event or a key up event, or the A is down from a paste. So there's something called bracketed paste in terminal land, which was invented to solve this problem. So anyway, there are a whole bunch of problems with this. The encoding for modifiers was so primitive that you could only really support Control and Alt, and that were not even together. And a lot of keys encoded to the same bytes. So like, for example, the classic example is the tab key and the Control I key encode to the same bytes. So you can't distinguish them in terminal programs, or at least you couldn't before the Kitty keyboard protocol. So I ended up making the Kitty keyboard protocol, and I remember having long discussions with Bram. This was before he passed away, about getting it into Vim, and he had a lot of salty opinions about it, but finally, eventually, he agreed and made it into Vim and made it into Mule from various other terms. And today, it's fairly widely used. There are several terminals that use it and so on. So that was the next big thing I did in Kitty. And so, and then after that, and then my next windmill that I'm looking at is variable size text in the terminal. So when I'm adding a markdown file, I want to see the headings big and
like in Emacs, right?
Yes. So why should only Emacs users benefit? I want all terminal users to get
your
into
bigger
that.
headings.
So now,
yeah.
So so there's actually a program called PresentTerm, which can make presentations in the terminal. So that actually uses the Kitty facility for showing multiple size text for headings and for superscripts and subscripts and so on. But anyway, getting ahead of the story. So I decided to look into that. So there's an existing standard as always. I don't remember the name or the escape code anymore, but basically what it would do is you can designate a line in the terminal buffer as twice, as 2 times the height, 2 times the font size. But the problem with this is that it does it for the whole line. It doesn't do it for just 1 character or 2 character. So the problem with that is it doesn't work, for example, with a multiplex at Tmux, because the whole line becomes that double size when Tmux is splitting the screen into different screens. So you want to stop that double size thing at the point where multiplex is splitting the screen. So this was a non-starter. I mean, a lot of people use multiplexers, and so it's not going to be suitable for this use case. And plus, then I also wanted superscripts and subscripts. Being an ambitious guy, I said, why stop at headings? Let's do superscripts and subscripts as well. So I said, okay, I've already made all these protocols, and people keep yelling at me for it. So let me add one more into it. So I made what's called the text sizing protocol, and so that protocol has the ability to make individual characters either bigger or smaller. So because of the nature of the terminal, it's a character grid, right? It's a grid of equal size cells. So that it's not completely free font size. It has to be either double or triple or quadruple or some fraction of a cell. It's not fully free size, but it's a lot better than what we had before. And then in the course of doing this work, because no good deed goes unpunished, I also decided to look into the yeah, terminal UI is basically text, right? A program like Wave Modern Editor draws its UI using text. There are some Unicode symbols, some normal text, so on. So now the problem is that the program running in the terminal and the terminal itself have to agree on the width of that text. By that I mean how many cells a particular piece of text takes. So like it's obvious for like say ASCII text, English text, like an A takes 1 cell. Like what emoji takes 2 cells. I mean, these things are well established. Everybody agrees on them, so on. But the problem is that there's a lot more to text than just ASCII and emojis. There's thousands of languages, scripts. There's the whole of Unicode. And so when you get into that, there are all sorts of complications. So for example, there's a pair of special characters called the variation selectors in the Unicode standard. So if you follow a certain characters with a VS16 variation selector, they become wide. If you follow a wide character with a VS15 variation selector, they become narrow. Now, if you think about it, you think of the case of a wide character becoming narrow. Now, a terminal is a serial device; it gets bytes at a time, a character at a time. So imagine the terminal emulator gets a wide character, and the cursor is at the end has only 1 cell left at the current position. So it will go to the next line and put the wide character there. But then sometime later, you don't know how long, it could be any amount of time, because of network delays or whatever, you get the variation selector, which makes the wide character narrow. But now it's on the next line. You can't move it back up because there could be, the whole scroll back would have scrolled. You don't know what's happened and it's not possible to move it back up. So now what that means is that it's impossible to measure the width of a string of text in the presence of these variation selectors, because you need to know the screen width. So like, if your wide character and the variation selector that make it narrow are right at the end of the screen, then they fall off the screen with the next line. So you can't calculate the width anymore without knowing the width of the screen you're entering the text to. And there's a big problem it's fundamentally, like if you're writing a terminal program, it becomes really difficult to work around this, and various other issues. I mean, there's a whole small dashboard of issues. I'm not going to go into them. This was just an easy to illustrate one. But so anyway, so to fix this, I have made yet another standard. I've codified all the rules by which the width should be calculated. I've specified the algorithm. I've done all that, and I made and so part of the text sizing protocol, there's a subsection of it called the width. So now terminal programs can send pieces of text to the terminal and specify what width they want to render in. So it doesn't matter now. The terminal and the terminal and the program don't have to agree on the width. If one is different from the other, it doesn't matter. The program is in control, and terminal will just do what the program tells it to do. So this comprehensively solves this issue. But I mean, this is very new. I think this is just a few months old. So we'll see what sort of adoption it gets in the future. But yeah, that's the latest windmill I've been thinking at in Kitty.
Now, you talked about the Kitty graphics protocol. Is that a standard now? Is that something that all of the terminals use?
Not all by any chance, by any means. So the more modern ones tend to support it. The older ones don't. So like, for example, now, I think the first terminal other than Kitty supported was Western. And now the new kid on the block, Hosty, I think that's how it pronounced, also supports it. Console supports it partly. So but then there are big holdouts, like for example, the VTE library, which is used by the GNOME terminal and all similar terminals. They don't support any image protocol. I think there's some discussion about them supporting 6 cells, but at the moment they don't support anything. So those just can't be images in those terminals. Then similarly, the multiplexers, I think Tmux supports 6 cells with a compile time option, but not on by default. And so it's a mess. I mean, if you're somebody who's writing terminal programming, you want to work in a lot of terminals, you really have to work hard and make some sort of abstraction layer over the various protocols. I mean, the Kitty graphics protocol is by far the best. I'm saying it, obviously I'm biased, but I mean, it's clear to anyone who reads the protocols that it's by far the best designed and most capable. So anyway, I'm hoping that its adoption will grow with time. One thing, all I can do is build it and hope they come.
Yeah, I have played a little bit with images in terminals, and always Kitty, the Kitty graphics protocol seems the best option. And I use Tmux, and I view images inside NeoVim. So Kitty graphics protocol is the only one that has allowed me to do that. In Western, Ghosty, Kitty, of course, as well, right? So if other terminals want to adopt it, they can. Like Rio, for example, is a new terminal out there. So it can adopt the Kitty graphics protocol and use it, right?
Yes, absolutely. I encourage everyone to adopt it. There's an open spec. Anybody. Lots of people have asked me questions about the protocol, and I try to answer them as quickly as possible. And I'm happy to consider amendments to the protocol to make it more functional or easier to implement. Or if you go to the graphics protocol page and on the Kitty website, you'll see version added. There'll be a lot of version added things. All changes to the protocol are made over time in response to requests from users or implementers and so on. So yeah, it's in fact now you can even watch videos in your terminals. MPV has a Kitty backend, and it actually works quite well. I sometimes find myself have fun watching videos in Kitty.
Interesting.
So yeah,
Interesting.
So video was not a use case I envisioned when I made the protocol, but because of the shared memory method of transmitting images, the performance is actually acceptable for reasonably sized videos when you're going to watch them inside your terminal.
Okay.
And then
awesome.
talking about out of the box use cases, there's actually a full Chromium instance that runs inside Kitty using this protocol. The project is called AWRIT. I guess it's sort of all right or something like that. But it runs a full Chromium instance and renders it inside Kitty using the graphics protocol, and it uses the Kitty keyboard protocol for commanding the keyboard and so on. So you can actually have a full browser in the terminal.
Oh, I didn't know that. Interesting. So full browser in Kitty, right?
In Kitty, yes. I think it also might work in Ghosty, but Ghosty graphics protocol performance is not on par with Kitty, so it can be a bit slow there. They're aware of it, and they say it and fix it. Fine. That's some of the out of the box uses. There's actually a page on the Kitty website called Integrations with Other Tools, and it lists these.
Can I share your screen so you can?
Yeah, sure. I'll show you the page. It's right here. So you can see, it starts out with image and document viewers. So there's a whole bunch of document viewers, PDF. I told you about Markdown. And then there are these file managers. I think Ranger was the first terminal file manager with previews that were powered by Kitty's graphics protocol. There's a whole bunch of others. And the present term was the project I was telling you about, which shows Markdown-based slides with images and actually now variable size text as well. So there's a whole bunch of these. All right, this is the full Chromium-based web browser running in the terminal. Even the old W3M, which is a venerable project, it's a text mode browser, but it can show images using the Kitty graphics protocol. MPV is the video player that can play videos in the terminal. And of course, there are all these various system data visualization tools. I'm not going to bore you by listing them all. But there are various editors that use Kitty's remote control feature, which is the ability to control Kitty using over a socket using any programming language you like. There's a whole protocol for that, and so many of these editors integrate with that remote control protocol, and so we can navigate between terminal panes and the panes, the windows in the editor itself seamlessly, and so on. And then, like for example, I think you mentioned using the images in Nvim. So there are various image probe plugins for Nvim. So on. So this is something that I'm working on currently, and last month or so. So a little while back, I released something called the Panel Kitten. Not a little while back, actually, this was quite a while back. But initially, used to work only on X11, and what it does is it allows you to draw panels on your desktop. So like if you see on my screen the top bar, this is actually a Kitty instance running a terminal program that shows various system information. So the Panel Kitten Let's go to
So
it and
Kitty
look.
is like your Emacs. You run everything inside Kitty.
Yes, 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 yes. I like to live in the terminal as much as
Terminal.
possible. Uh, yeah. So let's see. So this is something I just released called the Quick Access Kitten. So this uses the panel kitten and it gives you a terminal you can access out of single press, and it works in macOS and Nearline in X11. It was a huge headache getting it working in all three, but eventually managed. So you can see here in the screenshot, the desktop background is a program called BTOP, and that's
Mhm.
running inside Kitty. And then on top of that, there is a quick access Kitty, which is just a normal terminal, but it's overlaid on top of the desktop. If there was any windows open, then it would have been overlaid on top of the windows.
Mhm.
So so this works in macOS, and here's a screenshot of it in Hyperland and Linux. Um, so this is something that I've been using, working on currently, and the part of it that I'm working on currently is using Kitty to replace the file open dialogues in Linux. So when you use a GUI program like say Firefox, um, you say file save page as, you get a file open dialog usually. Here you see there's actually a Kitty instance that's running a file choosing kitten. So you can use a fuzzy finder like selector. So you can just type a few letters and it matches files accordingly. And you can use that to actually select files. Because I use Calibre a fair bit, I find myself using the file open dialog a fair bit,
A lot.
and that
Yeah.
annoys me. It
Yeah.
annoys
Me
me
too.
because
It puts you
I
in a
decided.
completely. Yeah. To me, it puts me in a completely different directory, and I have to see, okay, where am I at, and go and search. I
Yeah,
don't like it.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I decided to do something about that and make one that works the way I want it to work and uses that's keyboard centric and fast and developer friendly, blah blah blah. So that's what I'm currently working on in Kitty. So this the preview I showed you just now is it's not really ready for prime time. It's still to be worked on, but that's what I'm working on these days.
Okay. Now, for people that don't know about Calibre, would you mind
Um,
sharing a little bit about Calibre with us? Like, just letting us know what Calibre is for people that just know Kitty, right? Just an
okay.
quick overview.
So Calibre is an ebook management program. So ebooks are basically electronic books. So what Calibre does is it allows you to manage a collection of ebooks. Now, Calibre is mainly meant for somebody who's really into books, who wants to manage their own collection. If all you do is read one book a year, is no need for a Calibre. But if you're a serious reader, you read a lot of books, you have a collection, you like to search it, etc., then Calibre is for you. So its main interface is just a collection of books. You can change it to show covers, if you prefer that, um, and so on. It's like Kitty. It's very much a Swiss Army penknife. That's my philosophy in software. So it has a ton of features. You can edit the metadata of books. So you can change the title. You can change the author, series, rating, whatever. You can download metadata. So there's a plugin system which allows Calibre to go and download metadata from different websites, Google and so on, and a whole bunch of other plugins. Calibre has over 300 plugins, I think, at present. So that's the edit metadata. You can convert the books to different formats. So sadly, there's no standardization in the ebook space. EPUB is supposedly the standard format, but then Amazon has its own proprietary format, and then Kobo, which is another ebook reading device with its own format called KEPUB. So as you can see, Calibre allows you to convert to all these various formats, including a whole bunch of legacy formats like Lit is an ancient ebook format that Microsoft introduced. LRF was the ebook format, Sony's proprietary ebook format, and so on. You can even convert to Word documents if you like, to and from actually. But so that's convert, and there's view. There's Calibre has a built-in viewer, so you can view books. This is in dark mode, so it's white on black, but normally it's black and white. So you can view books, and the viewer is extremely capable. It has text to speech, and It has a pretty sophisticated search function. So you can search by regex, you can search for whole words, nearby words, contains, blah blah blah. So it's a good. It's of course highlighting. You can highlight things.
Add notes and all that stuff.
Add
Okay.
notes, highlight stuff, all that stuff. It's got everything that you would possibly want to do. And as with all my softwares, it's extremely customizable. It's got like a huge set of preferences that you can get
So
into. So
it even has like a built-in Kindle app, we could say, right? So you can read, annotate, do everything with your books there.
Yes, and not only. So I've shown you this. I've shown you this running, in a software on your desktop. But Calibre also has something called a content server. So you can start the content server. No space to differences. So start content server, and then if you go to I actually don't know this is currently set up. Not, but you can access your libraries sort of in a browser. This is a browser. This is actually Vice, which is my own personal browser that you can use it access it in any standard browser. So you can access a collection on a browser. You can read the books. The same book that I was reading in the Calibre viewer, you can read it in your browser. So you can change pages, blah blah blah, whatever. And this works, on mobile phones and devices.
So if you expose it correctly, you could access it from any device in your local network.
Any device in your local network, or even over the internet if you want to. It supports authentication, so on. So you can expose it over the internet, and when you're traveling, you can read books. That's up to you what you want to do with it.
Now, quick question before you move on. Are you able to? Is there a Docker container version of Calibre that I can host on a server?
There probably is. There is actually, but I personally so Calibre comes as its own self-contained binary. Well, not a single binary, but a tar file which you untar into one directory. And all you need to do is untar that tar file, and then you can run the server without it. It's for all its dependencies bundled. You don't actually need Docker. So you can go to see.
So I can run it in a headless server, no GUI.
Yes, no GUI, just run the server. There's an executable called, let me show you, Calibre server. So you can run the server, and that same server is running now, but via a command line program. So you can install this on any Linux machine and run the server and access it from anywhere. And in fact, there are other projects, third-party projects that make their own Calibre servers. The most popular is something called Calibre Web. So you can use that instead with your Calibre library if you want to. If you don't like the look of the defaults or whatever. So there are a lot of options. So yeah, where was I? So one other feature I'd like to highlight in Calibre, which some people don't know about, is the Fetch News feature. So the Fetch News feature basically allows you to download news from news websites, publicly accessible websites. So you can see that there's a whole bunch of, there are thousands of these. These are based on the scripts called recipes that are maintained by Calibre users and me. And so they go out and they scrape the website and they download the news, and you can read the news as an ebook. So this is nice because it gives you a distraction-free sort of environment in which to read the news. You can't comment and you can't get distracted by external links and so on, and you just focus on the actual content. So I do that. I mean, I personally, like I said, I read a lot, so I download 3 or 4 of these publications every week, and I read them. And in fact, one of my happy side effects is my daughter also uses Calibre to download publications that she likes to read and reads them. So that was something kind of cool to see for myself. So yeah, that's the main headline features of Calibre. It's of course just the tip of the iceberg, but I think that's
now,
suitable for.
My wife has a Kindle, and
Mhm.
sending books to that thing is not something that I enjoy, because I have to send it to an email or I have to download an app, and it's just I keep forgetting how to send books to it. If I have to send a book
Mhm.
right now, I don't know how to do it. I don't remember. I have no
Okay,
idea.
so let me give you a demo. I have a Kindle somewhere here. Let me just pick it up. Okay, so this is a Paperwhite, a Kindle Paperwhite. Can you see it?
Yeah, I see
Yeah.
it.
So
Yep.
so all I need to do is use good old USB cable. There's no network, no Amazon is not snooping on me. My Kindle stays in airplane mode all the time. I'm plugging it into my laptop.
Uh-huh.
If you look at the screen,
Yep, I see it.
uh, yeah, it'll show up in a minute. It takes just a few
Have
seconds to
you?
connect. You see it's
Oh yeah.
connected.
Yep.
Can you,
hmm
yeah. So you just click on the book. Say I want to read the importance of being honest. You just click on this book and then click send to device, and Canva will ask you, convert the book to the format for the device because it's not pre-converted. Click yes, and that's it.
It
The
will
book is on the
automatically convert
device.
it to whatever Amazon's format
Yes,
is. Mobi, I
yes,
think.
yes, yes, yes. Mobi is the old one. Amazon actually has 3 formats. Let's not get into that, but it'll convert it into the most appropriate format for your Kindle and put it on the Kindle automatically. You can see the list of books on the device. You can, delete them, whatever, can't transfer them to your library and so on. So it's really simple as you saw, you just plug it in, you click the book and you click a button. And in
hmm
fact, one of my happy things I'm happy about with Caliber is I get a lot of positive feedback from elderly people, and
hmm
uh, because ebook readers are a big boon for elderly people, because you make the font size bigger. In fact, I do that myself. I don't know if you can see
As you
this on the
age,
screen, but yeah, as
as
I
we
age,
age, yeah.
my eyes have gotten weaker, and so I don't like to wear specs while reading on my Kindle, so I make the font size big. So when I started, I didn't need that. Now I do.
Yeah.
But the point is, I get feedback from a lot of non-technical people who are, not so comfortable with computers, saying that they really find Calvo easy to use, and they're able to use it. And a lot of people, introduce their parents to it or whatever. I introduce my own parents, and
Mm,
they're self-sufficient and they can figure it out on their own.
yeah. So
That's really
it's a good
a good
app
feeling.
if you can figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
It has happened to me as well. My font size used to be smaller. It increased this last year. My resolution also increased. So it's just going to get bigger and bigger from now on. I have a question for you. Have you gotten in trouble with Sony or with Amazon or any of these companies due to this tool?
No, not at all. I don't. So Scalable itself doesn't have any, say, DRM breaking facilities or whatever. There are third-party plugins that do this. Calibre itself doesn't do anything. So I never got into trouble. In fact, in the early days, Sony wanted to buy Calibre. I remember going to their San Diego offices and talking to them about it. I don't know, but it didn't end up happening. But yeah, no, I've never gotten into trouble.
No.
Anyone.
Didn't they get upset when you reverse engineered their protocol and all that stuff? Sony?
They were really happy. So, Calibre ended up being a better program than the proprietary reading program, which often happens, when hardware companies are not good to make software or whatever. So,
hmm
and so they were happy because, Calibre was making their device more useful, increasing their sales. They had no problem with it.
Mm.
And in fact, so the PRS 500, the first one they released, had their own proprietary protocol, but later on they changed, and the later models used the standard USB mass storage protocol. And so, there was no need for reverse engineering their protocol. And they started supporting the EPUB format, and they didn't have to use the proprietary format. So that was, a good thing. And yes, no, they never had any issues with Calibre.
Oh,
Same
with
with Amazon.
Calibre,
I think
okay.
I've had only, I think, one interaction with somebody at Amazon, which was about some technical issue with the look for ads. No problems.
Oh, okay. Now, well, Rumen in the comments says that genius, that is what happens when a software developer solves problems for something that they're using. You use your tools, right? That's like one of
Very
the,
much.
yeah. So
I
you
make
get,
I make them because I use them myself. So
yeah,
that's the reason I make them.
That's the reason they're good, actually. Now, do you ever get in trouble with Kitty because of the language that you decided to use Python? Since we hear nowadays everyone is like Rust, Rust, Rust. You just hear that everywhere, right?
So on the contrary, I think using Python is one of Kitty's strengths. So Kitty has a system called kittens, which are like small programs that you can use to to customize its behavior and modify its UI and so on. And so these are in Python, and this feature was easy for me to add because Kitty was already in Python. So the problem that most people have with Python is that it's slow, but that's irrelevant because you drop down to C or some other compiled language, whatever you like, for the performance sensitive parts. So, like for example, in Kitty, the parsing of the text string from the terminal program actually uses SIMD instructions. So that's use processing multiple amounts of data with a single CPU instruction, so-called vector programming. So I wrote that by hand using a library called SIMD in C. And so when Kitty is parsing data, which is the performance sensitive part, it does this not even using regular C, but using something called SIMD, which leverages your processor to the maximum for maximum performance and power efficiency. So the Python is not involved at all. Like once all the parsing is done and most of the thing is be converted to characters and styles and whatever else, then at some point Python gets involved and tells the rest of the system where on the window to draw that buffer of characters. But that whole buffer of characters and its management is all happens in C. So the performance aspect is completely irrelevant, and Python gives you a lot of flexibility. It's a great scripting language and the most popular scripting languages in the world. And so you can script Kitty in Python, which is great, and that came for free because the UI is in Python. So like for example, other terminal emulators that are mainly a compiled language, be it Rust or C++ or whatever, they have to bolt on scripting. You have to add a scripting engine and then expose your native APIs to it. Whereas in Kitty, it's naturally there because everything's implemented. The higher level APIs are all in Python already. So your kittens written in Python have access to everything out of the box. I don't have to keep bridging things and exposing things, and
so if I want
it's very efficient.
Create a kitten, if I want to extend Kitty some way, just Python, no gimmicks, just Python, and it would work. Interesting.
It works. And so you can't do things like change how Kitty passes input from the program, because that happens in C4. But the whole UI is in Python, so you can that's the part that users mostly care about, right? You don't care about how the deep down the guts of the thing work.
Yeah,
you care about the UI, you care about the experience of using it, customizing it. So that part is in Python, and that's why it's customizable. So I think that worked very well, and so the thing that people have against C is that it's not memory safe, and that's true. It's not memory safe. But if you're a little bit careful and disciplined, that issue can be managed quite well. So, like if you look at Kitty's security history, there have been, I think, 1 or 2 memory-related bugs in almost a decade of history. So, so the thing is, so the main place that memory issues tend to bite people is in the lifetimes of objects or pieces of data. So now you forget to free something or use something after it's freed. So I avoid that in the design of Kitty by mostly tying that into Python's memory management. So all the data structures also have a second identity as Python objects. So the Python runtime manages their lifetimes for me, so I can rely on it to clean it up, do the garbage collection, whatever. But all the actual hot processing happens in C. So using that combination, you get most of the memory safety just by piggybacking on Python's runtime. But you can drop down to absolute speed to the extent of using SIMD instructions or whatever. I mean, C, you can do anything. I mean, you can even write pure assembly if you want to and embed it in your C. So it doesn't get faster than that. So I think
Yep.
it's an underappreciated but good combination. At least it works for me.
I always
I'm happy to
wonder.
get.
Yeah, I always wonder why I didn't feel Kitty slow since it's written in Python, but I didn't understand like the heavy lifting and all the power processing
Mhm.
is done in C. Because I compared it with Western, which is written in Rust, I think, Ghosty, without Tmux, the three of them, right? Just scrolling up and down, J, K, just scrolling up and down. And I was like, but Kitty is Python, and I don't see it slow. I don't feel a difference between the three, to be honest. Kitty,
Mhm.
Western,
Or there is
and
no user.
Ghosty.
There is no user perceptible difference. All modern terminals, are designed with performance in mind. So, like I said, 10 years back when I started Kitty, this was not the case. A lot of our terminals left a lot of performance on the ground.
Mm.
But the new generation of terminals all start out with performance in mind, so they're all pretty performant. I mean, there's not much user perceptible difference. I mean, if you run benchmarks, you can see the difference, but just from day-to-day usage, you won't see any significant
Yeah, that's what
performance
matters,
difference.
what you see and what you
Yeah.
feel. Yeah. Now, how involved are you with both of the projects, with Caliber and Kitty? Are they mainly community driven, or you take all the calls? How does that work?
So I work full time open source. So, like I said, Calibre is my day job. Calibre is a huge community. There's hundreds of contributors, engaged users. I deal with roughly about 100 pieces of user communication every day, day in and day out for like years again. So, and I merge PRs, I write code. I mean, so the reason I do this, like I said, I started out doing this for my own use. But obviously, I mean, they're grown far beyond my own use. I don't need, you know, 80% of the features that Calibre and Kitty have for my own personal use.
Mhm.
But those are common response to user requests and organic growth. Um, but the reason I do it is because I actually love coding. I love programming. I always have. I started programming at the age of 7, and I've been programming all my life. So it's just something I love to do. So I make sure that I'm, mostly programming, and then I of course do the user emails and support and stuff, and I merge some PRs. And yes, I am the so-called benevolent dictator for life on both those projects. So I make the final calls and everything. But I'm very open to people's ideas and PRs. And you can see if you go to the contributors page of both these projects, there are literally hundreds of people that have contributed code to each project. So you know, um, yeah, that's how it works for me.
Okay. Okay.
So
Now,
both of these projects have a bus factor of 1. So that's why I do so much exercise. I will try to keep myself healthy.
oh, okay. Now, um, I have a tough one for you. I have a good question.
All right.
I want to see.
Let me let
Yeah,
me drink some water
grab your
first.
water first. Yep, yep. So you mentioned it. We briefly talked about it. I think you know what I'm gonna ask, probably, right? So let's just say it. What are your thoughts on Tmux?
Oh, I don't know anything against Tmux in particular, but terminal multiplexers as a whole, I think are a bad idea. It's the reason is quite simple. There are two reasons. One is so a terminal multiplexer works. I mean, it is the traditional type of terminal multiplexer like Tmux works by essentially implementing a terminal inside a terminal. So every byte of data that comes from the actual terminal application has to be interpreted by 2 terminals. Now, obviously, this is a doubling of the cost, the halving of performance, doubling of CPU cost, whatever. I mean, this can't be avoided. No matter how well Tmux designed it, it is 2 terminals in the end. So that is one obvious problem with terminal multiplexers. The other more insidious problem that most users may not realize or care about even is that it makes it much harder to design new features into the terminal ecosystem because the terminal multiplexers, like I said, they're a second terminal, right? So if somebody is using, say, Kitty and Tmux, for a feature to work well, it has to be supported by both Tmux and Kitty.
Yeah.
And only if both of them cooperate and both of them implement that feature, does that feature actually end up in the hands of the end user.
Mhm.
and it's worse than that, and that's because a terminal multiplexer works by essentially rewriting the escape codes that move between the terminal and the terminal program. So it has to do that because it splits up the screen, but the terminal doesn't know the screen has been split. The terminal program doesn't know the screen has been split. So they are both as working on the assumption there's a single screen. But to somehow make that into two screens, all movement things like say like a command to move the cursor to the end of the line, okay, a simple command, or say the beginning of the line, even simpler. That's the carriage return. That's just a single character, right? Supposing you're in the right hand side pane of a tmux split. Now, if tmux passed that carriage return character unmodified to the terminal below it, the cursor would actually move to the beginning of the left pane. But the program that's running the right pane would have expected it to move to the beginning of the right pane. Like that's its window. So tmux has to actually intercept that escape code and change it to something else. It changes it to a cursor movement code that actually moves the cursor to the beginning of the right pane, which is actually the middle of the screen as far as the actual terminal is concerned. And this is just the simplest possible thing. It's the carriage return. It's a really simple escape code. There are far more complicated escape codes. Like I told you a little bit about the Kitty graphics protocol and Unicode placeholders and kind of hacks that we had to do to get it to work with tmux. So it imposes that kind of cost on the entire ecosystem. It becomes much harder for new features to be developed and to propagate. It ends up being like there is just a couple of gatekeepers for these features. So like if I want to implement some feature in my terminal and make it available to my users, if my users are using tmux, I can't do it because unless I can convince the tmux developers to agree with me and implement that feature too. I mean, I can try to do some hacks like I did with the graphics protocol, but that's suboptimal for obvious reasons. So that is I think that terminal multiplexers are a sort of drag on the ecosystem's evolution as a whole. So that is one of the other reasons that I think that terminal multiplexers are not a good idea. And finally, a terminal is really a giant state machine. There's like a huge amount of state. The current text color, the the decorations, the underlines, the various little knobs that change what happens when you receive escape codes. I mean, I'm not going to go into details, but there's like a huge amount of state that every terminal maintains. And a terminal multiplexer not only maintains the state itself, it has to translate this state between its own state and into some kind of state that works with its host terminal. And each host terminal is slightly different. They have slightly different behaviors, quirks, features. And so the terminal multiplexer has to bridge between them. It's like an insanely complex problem. You're sort of bridging two, slightly disparate states, very complex states, very large states, and you do it robustly. And so, if you go to any terminal program or sophisticated terminal programs, a bug tracker, and you search for, say, tmux, you find a whole bunch of bugs that occur only inside tmux.
Yeah,
not when they run in the host terminal.
Yeah, I
yes.
have
So,
experienced.
that's kind of the practical consequence of what I'm saying. I'm saying it abstractly, like state machine, and it has to bridge things. But the practical consequence is there are a lot of bugs that happen because the program has to run inside a terminal anyway, terminal multiplexer, and that terminal multiplexer itself is running inside a terminal anyway. And it's just an extra layer that, in my opinion, is not worth the cost. So, like, if I were to design a multiplexer myself, and this is on my to-do list at some point, I might end up doing it, is I would not try to split a single TTY into multiple windows. Instead, I would delegate the window management to the terminal and have a dedicated TTY per window. So this is much more robust. It doesn't require all the, like for example, the carriage return thing that I said. It just works automatically. So the downside of this is that my multiplexer will only work with, one or two terminals because, it requires features from the terminal which different terminals may not have. So like, for example, Kitty doesn't have this, but Western has its own multiplexer, which you can use as an alternative to tmux. So I don't know the details of how that works, but I'm guessing it's something similar. And so if I were ever to make a multiplexer, so the main use case of multiplexers really is the remote persistence use case. So you SSH into a server, and your network connection is flaky, so it will go off anytime. If you lose it, if your network drops, you don't want to lose a session. the running program shouldn't end and so on. So that's the one thing that I would still say that Tmux is somewhat useful for. I mean, for the local use case, I'm of the opinion that multiplexers are completely an anti-pattern. You can do everything that you can do locally without the multiplexer just as well, if not better. But for the remote use case, there's still, I can see the use case. I personally don't use it. I have other ways of dealing with this problem, but I can see that it can be useful. So if I were to design a multiplexer, what I would do is I would make it, cooperate with this host terminal so that the windowing and the splitting of this, the screen, the multiplexing part is managed by the terminal, and only the session persistence part is managed by the actual multiplexer program. So it's separation of concerns. I mean, it is the terminal's job after all to put up windows and interact with them and whatever. So let the terminal do that, and let the multiplexer focus on the session persistence, which is what it needs to do.
Yeah.
So that would be my approach.
I have a question for you there. The reason why I use Tmux, I don't care about servers because I don't, my servers are locally. I SSH into them. If I lose the connection, I don't care, right? It's fine.
Right.
That part about Tmux is not important for me. If it's a remote server, I lose the connection, I just SSH into it again, fine. I don't mind about that too much. But what I use Tmux for is sessions, right? With the keyboard shortcut, right? 3 keys that I press on my keyboard, I jump to my .files. If I press another shortcut, I jump to my whatever project A. Another key, I jump to GitHub repos. Each one of them is a GitHub repo, which is a Tmux session. That is the only reason I use Tmux sessions.
So you can completely replicate that using scriptable terminaling. So I of course say Kitty, but I suspect you can do the same with, say, for example, REST. So you can have session. So Kitty has like I said, a remote control API. So let me just show you that on my
I'll switch to your screen.
So
can you ask Kitty, okay, is this session running? If it is running, just switch to it. Do not create it.
Yes.
Yes. Because that's the main thing,
Yes. So for example, so Kitty has a ls command. Okay, so let me show it to you in an actual terminal rather than browsing the documentation.
Okay.
So I'm starting Kitty. I'm giving it that I want to allow remote control. So here you see I have started a Kitty. Now let me create a couple of windows. Supposing in one window I run cat, just as an example. And now I want to check if cat is running. So you can run this command, kitten at ls. So what this does is it outputs a whole bunch of data in JSON format about what windows are running. So you can see in here somewhere there'll be window 1 and window 2, and somewhere in there there'll be a so you can see here the title, let me show the mouse. So you can see here the foreground processes. So you can see here this window is running the kitten at ls command, but the next window will be running cat. So you can easily query this using any tool like JQ or whatever. You have that information at your disposal, and then you can run a command like kitten at show. Not show, focus window, and you switch to that window. So these are, I'm showing you the building blocks. I'm not showing you a ready-made solution. You have already your own script and so on. But the building blocks are there. You can do all this kind of thing. I mean, I myself use these in my workflows sometimes. And and like I showed you in the integrations page, there are
but this is Panes, right? I don't use Panes too much.
Yes.
I use sessions. So a session occupies the entire screen for me. I switch to the other session.
So these are called OS windows in Kitty. It can focus tabs. That's the whole screen. It can also, though it's not showing it here, but you can also use it to focus OS windows. That's so like if you're using like Hyperland or some kind of tiling window manager, you can focus. You can get from the ls command. You can get the ID of the window, the OS window, and then you can tell your tiling window manager to switch to that. So you just write a script to do. Right?
Okay.
Or you can, if you don't want to use a tiling window manager, you can use tabs instead. So tabs work
Mhm.
the same as that. So you have one session per tab, and you use a
Yep.
focus tab command right here, and you can
Mhm.
do whatever you like. I mean, you can build your own workflow. So there are no ready-made workflows for this in Kitty, at least at the moment. But
Mhm.
the basic building blocks are there, and you can use them to compose your own workflow. So I kind of like that because I have different workflows for different scenarios. One size doesn't fit all the scenarios. So in Kitty, my philosophy is to give you the building blocks, give you the remote control
Mhm.
protocol, and a tool to control Kitty, and then you build it, use it however you like. I mean, in fact, remote control doesn't just work within Kitty. You can use it from outside Kitty. You can even do it over a TCP port. So you can do it from a different computer in your house. I mean, you can possibly design this. Um,
Mhm.
so all that is built into Kitty, and those building blocks are there, so you can build your tools from that. So like I was showing you the editor integration. So these things. So like for example, Vim Slime is a Vim plugin that allows you to have a Lisp REPL that you can control using Kitty remote control. So you can just send what you're working on to the REPL in the neighboring pane and have it execute, and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So Cocoon is an editor that doesn't have its own windowing, but so it integrates with Tmux or with Kitty or other multiplexers.
Mhm.
So to use the native windows of that solution rather than its own windows for
Oh.
repels and panels and so on. So so the building blocks are there, and people have made things with them. So
Mhm.
if you wish to look into it, you can do so, and make your own solution that suits your particular personal workflow.
Oh. Okay. Do you talk to the Tmux maintainer for compatibility when you try to deploy something new? Do you have communication? What's his name? I don't remember his name, but
Mhm. Um, I did try, but he wasn't interested, so I don't anymore. Um, Now so when I make something new, I try to keep in mind the needs of multiplexers and um, have some facility in there. So I'll show you an example.
yep.
Um, so this is a section on the Kitty website called Terminal Protocol Extensions. So let's look at desktop notifications. Okay, so this is a extension that Kitty has that allows you to uh, send to show desktop notifications on the user's desktop from a terminal program using escape codes. So there are already existing solutions, but Kitty's one adds various features that show in buttons on the notification, links, and actions, and so on. Anyway, the point is that going all the way down, so there is this little section identifier.
Mhm.
So this is there. So so the thing with notifications here is that when the terminal program sends a notification, it has a button. The user can click that button, and then the terminal sends back event to the terminal program saying that this button has been clicked.
Mhm.
So now how does that work with the terminal multiplexer, right? Because the terminal doesn't know which program inside the terminal multiplexer has sent thing. So this identify feature is there just for that, so that terminal multiplexers can add identifiers to these escape codes. Like I said, they have to rewrite escape codes. So they rewrite the escape code, adding an identifier, and so when the terminal responds to that notification with the event, it sends back that identifier, and the terminal multiplexer can read that identifier and from its own internal list send it to the correct window. So these kind of things I try to keep in mind so that multiplexers can work with features I design. It's not always possible to do so without cooperation from multiplexer authors, but
Mhm.
as much as possible, I do that. Um, and yeah, I mean, many of these. So that is one of my problems with terminal multiplexer. This just makes everything harder. So like here, there is a dedicated channel between the terminal and the program. So you don't need to worry about identifiers. You don't need to care about who sent what. It just goes on the channel and it's automatic. So once you put a multiplexer in the mix, you have okay, which window did it come from? If two notifications come from two different windows at the same time, what happens? There are all these sort of things you have to think about, and complicates life unnecessarily.
Yeah. I think sessions is one of the main reasons why a lot of people use Tmux still. There's other
Mhm.
people that do the remote server thing that you mentioned, right? So imagine that
Yeah.
having like a protocol that not only works in Kitty but works with Ghosty Wisdom as well, like a I don't know, a session protocol that works regardless of the
Yeah,
terminal that you use.
that's so the thing with the problem with that is that uh it becomes a sort of a lowest common denominator issue. Then the protocol can expose only features that all the terminals that support it had. So if you want a new feature, all the terminals have to agree, and so that becomes a break on development again. But that's trade-off, right? But the advantage is that then the multiplexer using that protocol would work with all the terminals
Mhm.
robustly. But so I mean, it's a trade-off, right? And different reasonable people can disagree on what end of the trade-off makes more sense.
Mhm.
So I'm very firmly on the camp that multiplexers, at least the traditional ones like TMUX, are a bit of an anti-pattern. So like I personally have been using terminals for a very long time, and like everybody else, I was excited by multiplexer and I tried them out and for my workflow and all. But even back then, I came across issues that were caused just by using multiplexer that didn't happen if it were just in the terminal. And that time I didn't know much about it. I didn't really understand the things, but that alone was enough for me to sort of form the opinion that this is possibly not a good idea. So I avoided them in my own personal workflows. Um, and then when it came time for me to make my own terminal, I tried to replicate the good parts of the multiplexers, the sessions, the control, the flexibility, um, as much as possible within the terminal itself. Because in my opinion, the terminal is the right place for this. Is the right level of abstraction for this. Right place for window management and interacting with the user and the keyboard shortcuts, the mouse actions, and so on. It should be managed by the terminal. The terminal is better positioned to do that than the terminal multiplexer. So it just
Yeah.
made sense to me.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. Now, moving on to another topic that I have here. We've been here for a long time. How much time do you have left?
Say about 15, 20 minutes.
Okay. Awesome. I noticed the cursor animations in Kitty. They were released, I don't know, a few months ago. Were they inspired by Neovite? Have you heard about Neovite?
Yeah. So I didn't actually make that feature. It's contributed by a user. Let me see if I can bring it up. Let me see. Yes, here we go. Here's the pull request. So by a user called Jin1 Lazy. I don't know how I'm pronouncing that right, but so he's made this pull request, add cursor trail feature to enhance the serviceability. So it's completely out of the blue for me. I mean, I was not thinking about it. It was not on my radar. Some user came and suggested this feature, and so it was quite a large feature. And we worked together and we implemented it. And mostly he did it. I just points feedback. And that's how it came. And yes, he knew about Neowide. I think he was inspired by that. I think if you search this page, you'll find Neowide somewhere. Whatever.
Yeah.
There you go. You can see right in the pull request, the very first post it's mentioned. So yeah, it was inspired by Neowide, but not by me.
Okay. Now, I just want to know about your setup a little bit more since we don't have a lot of time. And I just want to have a few minutes for questions as well. Your main IDE, which one is it?
It's
editor.
it used to be Win, now it's Neowin. So you can see this is a KD file inside Neowin. It used to be Win for a very long time. But once Bram passed away and there was some, the LSP integration in Neowin and so on, I switched to Neowin. And in fact, there's a very nice plugin for Neowin for KD called KD's fallback .mvim plugin, which is by the user, which allows you to browse the fallback in Kitty inside Neowin very conveniently and copy to the clipboard, edit it, whatever. So so like when you're in a, let me close this out. When you're in a terminal, you get a lot of history, right? So in Kitty, if you press Control-Shift-H, this opens by default in less. So you can search it and save it and whatever. So you can. So less is the default because it's installed everywhere else, but you can use your own program. And so this allows you to use Neowin. This plugin we talk about allows you to use Neowin as less to browse or scroll back. And so Kitty also has a feature that you can see the last command output. So like, for example, if I press Control-Shift-G, the last command's output opens in less. So again, you can use open it in Neowin instead and do something with it, whatever. So Yeah. So to answer your question, sorry, I got sidetracked. I use NewVim as my IDE. So I program primarily in Python, C, Go, my own language called RapidScript, and a little bit of Poca. I don't know how you pronounce that. Apple's Objective C, Photoshop, PDS on macOS. So NewVim is my common IDE for all those languages.
Mm.
I develop both Calibre and Kitty. In fact, I've always used Vim until I switched to Newman as my software
Now,
development editor.
it feels like you're trying to bring the Emacs experience into the terminal. Like you're trying to make the terminal like your operating system, notifications, browser, everything. What's your thoughts on Emacs? Sorry.
I'm fine with Emacs. I just prefer the modal editing experience, which is why I went with the nothing experience. In fact, way back when I just the modal editing and the verbs, the motion verbs and so on, they just clicked with my brain. So I went to Vim. Once you learn something, then
Yeah.
I've been happy with Vim. So and talking about making everything a terminal, here's a little. I pressed the print screen key on my keyboard and you get a screenshot tool, which is actually a Kitty window.
Uh-huh.
Right, so I'm just showing you how much I rely on Kitty in my own workflows.
Why not just come up with the Kitty operating system and we just avoid the operating system?
Someday. After I write that long promised multiplexer to replace remote persistence.
And what's your operating system of choice, by the way? Is it Linux? I saw Mac OS somewhere in there. So
yeah, no, my operating system choice is yes. It has been since I was 13 or something. Ages about. So I have macOS and Windows machines because I write software for those platforms as well. But my own OS of choice is Linux. So like Calibre, for example, is built for Linux, Windows, and macOS. So the macOS and Windows builds happen inside QEMU virtual machines, which may not be strictly legal and not shouldn't, but one is bother me not. So nowadays people do that, using GitHub Actions or in Calibre is 20 plus years old. There was no GitHub back then, and there were no, CI pipelines and stuff. So I had to make my own. So I used so originally I used VMware, and then I switched to QEMU. And so now it's just I just type in one command, and the builds happen on all three platforms automatically. It's a bunch of machines. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Oh no, because I was going through the Calibre's usage statistics and I noticed that most of the users are Windows. And I was like, why? But you already explained that because most of the user base is old people and they are definitely on Windows. I assume that's why, right? So
yeah, I mean, most of everybody is on Windows. I mean, globally, Windows has some 80% of market share of desktop and laptop computers. So, yeah, most of the users. I mean, the Calibre usage reflects mostly that trend. Those Calibre is not a techie, not aimed at techies particularly. So, non-techie people use it, and those are they probably follow the distribution of OSs that the general market does. So like, people often ask me, how did you like make a successful open source project? So I often say you have to go where the users are. So when I made the Windows and Mac OS posts of the original libTRs 500, because most people use those operating systems, and so if I wanted to be successful, I kind of had to go where the users are. So now Kitty, for example, I don't care about it's being that successful because it's really my workflow tool. As you can see, I use it for everything. So I only bothered with macOS because macOS is close to Linux, so it's not that much effort. So people keep requesting that I port Kitty to Windows, but the amount of effort is much larger. So I just don't bother.
There's WSL on Windows anyway, so they just let them run WSL and deal with it. All right. So due to time, I'm not gonna continue with any other questions. Is there anything you wanna share with the audience? Like, how can people support you? Like, is this through Calibre, or how can they? Because you live of
Um,
open source, right?
I live off open source. Yes. So you can donate either via the Calibre website or GitHub sponsors. Let me show you the uh, so if you go to either Kitty or Calibre's GitHub page, there's a sponsors button. There are loads. There. So there's a sponsor this project button. So you can do it via GitHub. You can do it via Patreon, LibRaPay, and so on. So whatever thoughts about, and that's how you can keep me financially going. And the other ways of supporting me is um, contributing to the project, something that scratches your own itch. It could be a translation, it could be documentation, it could be code, it could be issue triage. So, like for example, in Calibre, there's a huge community, right? Millions of users. There's no way I can do that support myself. So there's a Calibre forum on this website called mobileread.com, which I mentioned in the introduction.
Mhm.
And so there are a lot of veteran Calibre users who like answer user posts, so that I don't have to answer everything myself. But if you look, for example, over the years here in this forum, you can see that I have, you get karma points for people questions you answer. You can see how many, just to get an idea of how many questions I've answered. So if you want to sort of help out with these projects, you can, if you're an experienced user, you can join one of these forums and answer questions. I mean, there are Reddit forums for Calibre and TD and the GitHub issue for Calibre, and so you can just that's one way you can contribute if you're not technically inclined to act for whatever reason. So there are lots of ways of contributing. So like Calibre, for example, I mentioned it has a fetch news feature, so you can download the things like New York Times, Economist, to Atlantic, or whatever. So those are based on little Python scripts to scrape those websites, and so those are maintained by users. I try to pitch in, but I mean, I obviously have other things to do. So but mostly maintained by users, and so you can contribute to that, and it's a relatively contained, simple problem. So and that kind of thing. Yeah, the ways to contribute to open source are endless.
Okay, yeah, a lot of work, man. I see. Those are huge projects, and you have plans in mind. I don't know how you have the time, to work and all that stuff.
Yeah, I work all the time.
Yeah.
Like I said, I love to program. So
That's good. Now, one last question, just to wrap it up. And can you live off of open source? Then you're the living proof that you can, right? So just you mind just sharing a small, I don't know, whatever you want to share with people.
So I've been living off open source since I graduated from grad school, which was about 15 years, I'd say. And so it's going strong. I'm quite confident that I'll be here for 15 years more. So I just want to say that it's really possible to make a life writing open source software. Some key things that you should keep in mind is go where the users are, and solve real problems. Solve your own problems preferably, but real problems. And don't try to change the world or whatever, but just find some actual problem that you have or that people have, and solve it. And be dedicated, be honest, work hard, and be lucky. Luck plays a part. But Calibre was so successful because I happened to be in the right place at the right time, and that was a big part of its success. So you can try. It's a nice lifestyle if you can make it work. At the end of the day, when I look back at my life and I say I've done these things, I feel proud that I've made the world a slightly better place. So that's a good feeling, and it's a lifestyle where you're your own boss. I work very hard. I spend a large fraction of my day just working, but it's at my own convenience, at my own pace. I can take off for holiday anytime I want. So that I get to spend time with my kids, with my wife, my family, friends. So though I do work hard, I also have the flexibility to live a decent life. That's
you don't want
to
have another dictator. You want to be the only one, right?
Yeah, I'm the kind of person that likes to march to my own beat. So
yeah, definitely. That's a huge benefit.
I've made my life so that I can do that as much as possible. Yeah, open source rules. I mean, go for it if you can.
You leave a huge legacy, man, because it's huge tools, huge communities that you're leaving or that you're creating. So really appreciate it. Even more appreciate your time being here. I'm going to leave the links. Well, everyone knows your tools, so I don't need even to leave the links, but I'm going to leave them in the video description. So if you want to share some links with me, just share them. I'll put them in the video. Really appreciate your time, COVID. I hope to see you again. Whenever you want to share something about Kitty, hey, there's all these new features that I have about Kitty, and I want somewhere to share them. You can come to my channel, and we can do this screen sharing thing, talking and all that stuff, and you can share them with everyone. When sessions arrive, please let me know, and share them here.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't have any links right now. I just say, uh, find a program. Doesn't have to be Calibre. Can you find a program that you use and that you have good ideas to improve and go improve it? An open source program, obviously. I don't want you to come and necessarily work in Calibre or Kitty. Go do some open source something. So, I'm not going to post any links to any of my projects. Go out there, find your own, whatever makes you happy. Do that.
Right, COVID. Really appreciate it.
Mhm.
We'll see you till next time then.
All right. Yeah.